Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Urban Legends video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's start a whole new series here. This one based on some of your new suggestions, some of your past suggestions as well, and then also this one here that I teased the other day there on my YouTube community page. If you haven't had a chance, every now and then both there and on my Facebook page, I'll give little previews, little hints as to upcoming stuff that I'll talk about on my videos. And I was reminded of this topic the other day when I was looking at some of the videos on YouTube involving NES games. So in this case, it has to do with an urban legend associated with the difficulty, like why NES games, especially from the 80s, maybe up to the 90s, why they were made with such difficulty in terms of play. So I found some articles that had some interesting theories associated with them, and I thought I would share them here. And hopefully those of you that grew up in the days of the NES games, you'll hear this information and then start to wonder how much of this is true, how much of this is urban legend. Let's see. And I'd love to hear what your comments are on this as well. So, all right, let's go ahead and let's start this video associated with why NES games were inherently made with such a difficulty of play. So NES, yes, Nintendo Entertainment System, it was by far and still remains one of the most popular consoles of all time. If I'm not mistaken, it still is the most sold console out there. Maybe there's something else that already surpassed it in terms of units sold, but if it has, at least for the longest time, NES was king. And during that time period, people that bought it bought a whole lot of games. Games eventually evolved into being some truly memorable ones, like, and obviously like Zelda, Mario are the ones that stand out. But other things that people remember from those days have to do with certain games that are just so difficult to play, such hardness in terms of the levels that in some cases people never even finish the games themselves. I've played some of the NES games myself years later. I was finally able to start playing some of these games, and they are absolutely very difficult to do so. And so it makes people wonder, like, why were those games so inherently hard to play when afterward stuff involving like the SNES, the Genesis, and then other larger more advanced consoles, they evolved into having games with less difficulty but still longer play. So some interesting theories are out there having to do with this, and I'll include the links below if you haven't had a chance to, if you've seen these articles, in other words, in the past. I highly recommend doing so, and then that way you can see what they've come up with. And some of this stuff, it does stand out. So for starters, let's talk about the physicality of the NES games, like why that might have played into making things much more difficult. For the NES games, they have very limited capacity. I mean, it was something like 28 kilobytes as a record for each game. 28 kilobytes is nothing today. You may be lucky to get a fraction of a JPEG equals 28 kilobytes, but that was the actual length, the size, in other words, of the game itself. So these games only had a small amount of levels that could be played within them. And those levels, even then, were small in of themselves. So the idea was this limited capacity meant that the games had to be more difficult because you wanted to be able to have as an experience the game not finished so quickly. Because if you did finish it quickly, then it felt very unsatisfactory. So that's why some of the theories are that the limited capacity kind of inherently equaled making the games difficult in order for it to justify. If back then, and the games were expensive, they were like $39.99 in those dollars days, all of a sudden finishing it in 10 minutes ain't gonna happen. Like you wanted to be able to have someone play it for weeks on end, and then that way they'll get a much more satisfying experience. Another reason is this limited capacity also equaled no endings that were just like, let's say, endings that were advanced. Instead, anytime you finish one of those games, it was pretty much just the end, something along those lines, just a simple title text that pops up and it says congratulations, or it says some tiny text as far as a resolution to the story. There were no long graphics playing, no credits playing. Maybe you'll have some credits, but they were very, very simple credits. The whole point was this: the reward, if it was to get to the end of the game, if you were just counting on that, then you would have a very unsatisfied feeling as well. Today's games, anytime you get to an ending, it's almost like you have five different endings, like Silent Hill. You could pick and choose different courses to get to separate endings, or other games where they go into movie mode and you start seeing a very, very nice long set of scenes to showcase what you've won in terms of the reward for the game. Nope, back then you won the game and it was just a simple ending screen. So again, the developers wanted to make sure, at least the theory is, that the game, you wanted to make the game itself last longer, and that way when you got to the ending, it was more of a satisfaction of getting to the ending than watching it itself. Another theory is this: it has to do actually with arcades. Arcades, I remember vaguely some of those when I was a youngster. I was able to go to a few of those, but I loved going to them. I'm sure a lot of you out there love going to arcades too. The thing about arcades that made them so wonderful was you would put in all these quarters. Imagine that, like all this money that people placed into it. Like if they would have taken that money and invested it in something else, imagine how much that would return today. Either way, though, you would put that in, and then you would have a good, quick 3 to 5 minute game to play off of that quarter. Maybe even less. If you're lucky, you could get even more out of that arcade. But then you would go play another game, and then you'd play another game, and then you'd play another one. And the whole point is, by the time you finish the arcade, you probably spent a couple of bucks, $5, $10 right there, but you still got a satisfactory feeling out of it because you got to play stuff fast and furious. And these arcade games were specifically made for it. Plus, they wanted to make sure that they ended quickly because obviously it eats up more money. So the idea was this: NES, the theory goes, if they made their games longer, like in other words, if they made their games shorter, my apologies, if they made their game shorter, then it would just make people say, why am I playing this here? I could just go to an arcade and have a much better experience, and be with my friends and then be eating pizza there, everything as far as going outside and going to the arcade and spending my money there, instead of this game that just was gone in 5 minutes. So that's why the levels had to be made hard. That's why you had to keep repeating the levels just to pass them. All of it was because of competition associated with the arcade. So that's another theory. A next theory, I think this one is the most impactful one, and it has to do with this: money, 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 money when it comes to rentals. So during a time period associated with the NES games, there was all these video stores that you could rent video games from. And the going theory is this: every time you rented a game, the whole idea was to try to get you as a consumer to continue renting games. So how would that work? What's the easiest way to get someone to continue renting the same game? That's obviously make it so difficult that you never finish the game, that the only way to do so is to keep renting it. Makes sense? No. It's all about the dollar. Follow the money trail. That's why I think this is the more common one, because NES games and video game rental stores and all those other type stores, they went hand in hand. Games were too expensive to buy, but they were definitely in the right price to rent. And so if someone had to keep renting the same game over and over and over again, that was like a repeat customer. So that's what it's all about, and that's what I believe made these NES games so inherently difficult. Obviously, like the limited capacity, the arcade competitions, those came into play too. But the easiest tie-in when it comes to money, I believe, is that one there for these video game rentals. And then one last thing, another theory, and this one is actually more on the lines of fact, has to do with this. There's this quote that's there if you check on one of the links, and it's made in this link by one of the presidents of Nintendo. In a roundabout way, he was stating this. He said, these games were not made or essentially played by game testers. Sometime back then, there was just not really that big of a budget for these games. So there was not like an inherent pool of these testers made of youngsters who could play these games and say, whoa, this stuff is way too hard, tone it down a little bit. No, instead it was made by the developers themselves. And so if the developers are making them and they live, breathe, and die these games every day, that's what they get paid for. Like that's what they're doing 8 to 10 hours each day. By default, they will know every in and out of the games. Like they will be expert game level players already. So if they're the ones making it, then by default the games are that hard because of them. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it, when it comes to that, the notion that since these are made by expert game developers, then they make the game levels that hard naturally. So, and I think it makes sense. So that's the other more realistic real world, at least one you can tie to an actual president of Nintendo saying something along those lines. An honorable mention too, I wanted to say the last part of this video for this, the most difficult games that people still claim to this day. I'll include a link for that in terms of the top 10 hardest NES games that people state, and these definitely stand out. There's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles NES game. That one, yes, that one is so hard. I have never finished that game to this day. It's just something where I give up. Like at one point, battling underneath one of the sewers, that's it. You know, it's like throwing the controller at the TV type stuff. No way. So I've never been able to finish that game. I've actually had to see it on YouTube in order to see the ending for it or to get to the final level for it. Ghosts and Goblins, another mention here. I've never played that game, but that one is infamous for a lot of other NES players. Apparently, you only get like 2 hits. Is that right? 2 hits for the entire game. And then you're done. Like there's no save levels, nothing like that. So I'm not even going to bother playing that game if it's that hard. Silver Surfer, that's another one that people state is so hard. And I've played a little bit of that. I haven't even finished one level for it, not even one. And that's how hard that game is. Because anything, if you hit anything, if you get touched by anything, you're done. The game is done. You cannot go past that point. And you have to start everything all over. So no thank you, not playing that game either. And then finally, the infamous level of hell when it comes to NES games. Everyone knows that one. It has to do with Battletoads, that level where you're on that hoverboard, hover bike, whatever that is, and you're going through that level that looks like it's made out of intestines or brain matter. That one deserves a special mention. I have never ever gotten past that level. I have seen it on YouTube, people getting past it, and I marvel at how they're able to do so. It is a miracle, absolute miracle for them, especially at a certain point when you're dodging those columns from hell that just appear all of a sudden and you're zigzagging. No way will I ever get past that point. So frustrating. That game has never made me so angry when it comes to throwing things around, like in terms of the controllers, because of the difficulty of that level. So Battletoads, you remain number one, at least on my list. It is on others as well, and if you share that feelings too, I'd love to hear what your comments are. But what do you guys think as far as this video and the reasons that people are stating for the inherent difficulty, why NES games are more difficult to play back then? Let me know what your comments are. Share them below. Let me know what your theories are too. Maybe if there are other ones out there that make sense that you wanted to post below, please do so. And then lastly, any other games that you know of, the ones that I mentioned or any other ones that are just like infuriating, pull your hair out type stuff, please post those comments below too. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.